Again, now about vampires as a concept, because I think Karl Marx often used like vampirism to explain capitalism, right? He constantly used it as a metaphor, and I thought it was so brilliant in this, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but the minute they kind of lose is when they seek the white man's money. It's good me saying it, but I need you to say it.
Well, I said it with the movie, I can't double down. Like some of the stuff you asked me, but I can't like. Passion. And we editing the film and mixing the sound, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's what I meant, and this wasn't based on anything like direct, so you pull from yourself, you know what I'm saying? So I see a lot of myself in it.
We're gonna kill every last one of you.
Warner Brothers agreed to spend $90 million to make Sinners and agreed to give you a cut of gross ticket sales. Warner also agreed, and this is absolutely key, to relinquish its ownership of the film to you after 25 years. The Times reports, quote, some rival film companies were horrified.
I think that a lot has been made of my deal in particular. I'm not totally sure why, but nothing about this deal is a new thing, you know.
What's your guesses, Ryan?
It is not a con. I'd rather not say.
So, this handsome black man is named Oscar Micheaux, and he owns the title of being the first black director of major motion pictures in American history. Micheaux was born in Chicago in the late 1800s after the end of slavery, but still within Reconstruction and then obviously Jim Crow. Micheaux seemed to have an innate hustler's mentality, working numerous professions and business ventures, trying as much as possible to be his own boss, which led him to be a homesteader in South Dakota in 1910. Here he developed the knack for storytelling and fiction and eventually film, writing his first book based on his experience as a homesteader in 1919, which he eventually turned into a movie. Much of Micheaux's work is lost media. A glance at his Wikipedia page indicates that he has dozens of movies that just are not in circulation. But from what is known of his work, it's clear that way back in the 1900s, black artists like him were concerned with issues of race inequality and liberation. Micheaux wasn't the only black filmmaker of his time. However, scholars tend to put him above the rest due to the content of his films, the willingness to present a more robust and introspective image of black life in America than others would. Further, Micheaux didn't just challenge white people with his depiction of black life, he also addressed the prevailing opinions of black people about other black people at that time period where class divisions amongst black people were beginning to be more prominent. He was a pioneer in that regard. Because of this, he often faced protests and censorship for his films. The Hollywood system that we know today didn't really exist back then, but the same forces that shaped the Hollywood system definitely shaped what film would be in the 1920s. All of it still fundamentally driven by the same forces of capitalism, culture, and consumerism. All of those, of course, affected by race and class. Race and class dictate what stories get told and by whom. However, if you look at Micheaux from a certain perspective, maybe from the perspective of how art and media is controlled now, Micheaux might have had more freedom in the 1920s than black creators have today. Hollywood wasn't as much of a capitalist machine yet, so he didn't have to worry about streaming numbers and contracts and theater cuts and box office returns. He still had to find funds to make his movies, but didn't involve decades-long exclusivity deals and signing away rights to his own creation. He just had ideas and opinions and stories in him from a complex and full life, and he wanted the opportunity to tell those stories. Micheaux might seem like a tangential figure to bring up in this video about Sinners, but his experience is actually really emblematic of the question I'm going to be asking multiple times regarding this film. Why did we like Sinners so much? So what was your favorite part of the movie? What was your favorite part of Sinners?
Oh man, I think, as cliche as it is, I think the Somebody Take Me whole sequence was just so beautiful. As someone who loves Afrofuturism, it just felt like such a tribute to that entire movement and the entire idea of this interconnectivity throughout, specifically Black Americanness, but Black culture going backwards and all that connectivity.
The history of music that happens that just comes out of not nowhere, because it's been very music heavy, but suddenly that Ryan Coogler clearly decided, fuck it, I'm doing this.
So Sinners is a movie that low-key shouldn't exist. On paper, Sinners sounds like a corny idea from like a Black goth kid's Wattpad, but in reality, Sinners was a veritable amusement park ride of affecting character drama, over-the-top blood splatter, film nerd technical stuff.
So Sinners, we shot on the big boy format entirely. This is what we call large format in motion picture photography. It's just 65 millimeter.
High-minded symbolism, low-minded symbolism.
Using old stale grease.
I ain't never used stale grease, and you know.
Shut up, Annie.
A nice helping of social commentary and lots of love for Black art and music. Even as I say this, it still sounds like way too much for one movie, but somehow it works. There's so much to talk about that I don't even know where to begin. Yet at the same time, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, or you're not, but you clicked on a video about Sinners that was released 6 months after the movie came out, then you might know that despite all this good stuff within Sinners, I kind of didn't want to make a video about this movie. It wasn't because of anything negative I got from the movie, but for some reason I found Sinners uninspiring in terms of a deeper analysis that I would need to make a video. So the question is, what changed? Well, a lot. And a lot of it comes back to that question. Why did we like Sinners so much? And what does it tell us about the nature of Black art, which I think the movie was greatly about? I promise it'll make sense by the end. This is the Black Media Breakdown.
The movie is dealing with like archetypes and what will become hood culture.
And it's really something that Coogler has always had. He's always had a knack for writing Black men.
I wrote the original script based off of my relationship with my uncle. What I found myself doing when I would think about him, if I would listen to all the blues records, it would kind of conjure his spirit. It would be like you were sitting there listening with him.
Part 1, what made Sinners so amazing? And understand, because I love the movie, that question is also to me. It's not a rhetorical question or meant to be snarky or ironic. It's not a gotcha. It's more so challenging us to do a self-inventory of our vulnerability to media to figure out what makes us tick, and how Coogler is probably better than anyone ever has been at doing this unique dance with a Black audience. A movie this great deserves more than stans who get hypersensitive when someone says anything about it other than giving it the highest praise. So I want to contribute to that by engaging in maybe the most important form of criticism around any piece of media, which is criticism that also asks the viewer to interrogate themselves. As a show of good faith, I'll start with myself. I knew Sinners was different when I encountered probably my second favorite scene of the whole movie, a third of the way in this moment between Smoke and his estranged lover, Annie. And there's a lot of reasons to love this scene. It's a great performance by both actors. It's a really dramatic, important beat to understanding Smoke and Annie's characters. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but Michael B. Jordan really deserves an award. Wunmi Mosaku is also a chameleon, and she's a character actor in a variety of roles and often feels like a complete different person in all of them. So there's a lot of great elements of acting and representation here. The one most people talk about is Wunmi being a larger, dark-skinned Black woman and being depicted as the lover of a lighter, more traditionally attractive Black man. The absence of representation in this very normal type of coupling that you see in real life is so bad that some people first assumed that Wunmi, who was the same age as Michael B. Jordan, was playing his mother.
The movie was cast, because I know you have a casting person, but he's involved in that.
Right.
Even if the movie is cast, it's not the way Hollywood would cast that movie. If Hollywood's in charge, they're not casting Wunmi as the romantic interest. And I hate the fact that I can say that with such authority, and I don't want that. And I love the fact that that's, again, a meta moment. Me in the theater, who knows a little bit about Hollywood, is not operating at the level Ryan is goes like, boom. This is what happens when you put a Black man in charge who has integrity and has earned the ability to make the decisions he wants to make.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing with you used to see it in Spike Lee movies. Like, that's not how that would have gone down. Yeah, exactly. Like, her accent's thick and da-da-da, and she's, they would have called her plus size or something ridiculous, Like, that's the difference between a Black person in charge who's making the decisions and has surrounded themselves with other Black people and in the best way possible, allies who understand what the assignment is.
Another aspect of representation was the engagement with hoodoo as legitimate practice. Hoodoo being an umbrella term for a variety of traditional African spiritual practices that survived the Middle Passage and slavery. Something that is still practiced to this day by Black people, often by Black women. Hoodoo is different from voodoo, but like voodoo, is often depicted with this fantastical supernatural affect, which, while that may be more interesting on screen, is often greatly misrepresenting the actual practice. And while I'm sure this wasn't the perfect representation of this practice compared to its real life counterpart, I've heard a few hoodoo practitioners say that this was the first time it felt like the representation of this practice was done with respect and not turning it into a farce.
What I appreciate about the depiction of hoodoo, as I feel about any sort of like West African diasporic practice in this lens, is it being taken seriously. And so to see hoodoo being treated as communal, as root work, as something that was people going to Annie as like this important part of the community to go for health and understanding. And also that like just kind of like any kind of faith, it's not magic, it's not limitless. It cannot bring back the dead, but it can provide comfort and a sense of grounding in this moment and identity. And that it was something that Annie was very much is like, I was praying for you the way that my mother prayed for me, that this is something that is ancestral and bound to her intimately.
So that representation was great, but for me, it was a third thing that stuck with me. And that's when Annie used her real special powers on Smoke, the power of a woman's touch, and melted this man in her hands. This is not the most romantic or complex love scene, but this specific moment to me sent me on a spiral of thought. When was the last time I saw a straight Black man on the receiving end of this type of pleasure on screen in a serious tone? This is the type of pleasure that implies a deep connection to the person on the giving end. The type of pleasure that can only occur when someone, as Annie says in the scene, knows your body in ways that Black men are often discouraged to understand about themselves. Again, shout out to Michael B's acting here. This face, this combination of ecstasy, fear, and relief, considering who Smoke is as a character, a former soldier, a current badass and outlaw, probably someone who's not used to or comfortable with feeling defenseless. The way he opens up his body for her touch, that's not on accident. This is something that many Black men would and have died for. Deep, meaningful relationships between Black people do exist on screen all the time, but this moment of representation of receiving and relinquishing as a straight Black man is a bit unique. And I know I wasn't the only man in the audience that was like, ooh, I know what he's dealing with right now. That's a dangerous woman. That's a dangerous situation, but we do it anyway. So why did this scene connect with me and those other men? Because these are things I care about a lot. I've made whole videos about Black men's sexuality. And one of the core arguments in those videos is showing how Black men's sexuality is often depicted as aggressive, dispassionate, dominating, etc. And these are all real aspects of how Black men express and experience sex, but it's not the entirety of Black men's sexual being. However, it is what's most prominent in our stories in the media. So it's where everyone goes to when depicting us. It's also reinforced by social and cultural tropes reproduced by many men, often white men. And it doesn't take much to make the observation that many men, white and Black, kind of act like they don't actually like women or sex in general. Not in the sense of saying they're secretly gay, because gay men will tell you they deal with the same problems too, but that sensuality and pleasure is often stripped away from Black men in a way that limits our ability to even appreciate this type of touch. Think about how many rap lyrics we've heard in the last decade or so that are basically denigrating the idea of receiving pleasure and seeing sex as just a thing you do to affirm your manhood. I'll never forget a song where Young Thug, way back in like 2015, was complaining about getting head and not being able to get an erection as if it was the woman's problem. Go watch that old video on Black men's sexuality, but the point is that a variety of mechanisms throughout time that are both racist and sexist have stripped Black men of being complete sexual beings, and our image has reinforced this mutilation. But for a moment in this film, we see the opposite, and it's really something that Coogler has always had. He's always had a knack for writing Black men, which is why he's probably my favorite director, because I don't know if too many other Black male directors really get to the totality of one, capturing and appreciating certain elements of traditional masculinity while also being challenging to those elements. This is also something we see in Fruitvale Station and Creed. And I know this about myself, so I immediately understood why I like this part of the film, why Coogler is my favorite director. It's because he does an excellent job balancing things in these films that I'm uniquely vulnerable to. But that's just me, and that's my second favorite part of the movie. And if you're watching me talk about Sinners 6 months after it came out, maybe even a year, depending on when you're actually coming around to this video, then I hope that's what you're here for. Not just a simple plot regurgitation or repeating things that you honestly could have heard from any other video essayist. Well, I do get the feeling that nobody has fully touched on this one song from Remick, the Irish lead vampire. This has to have some further meaning I'm unaware of and I'm just unfamiliar with, because I don't know a lot of Ireland's history of anti-colonial resistance to the British and how that reflects a lot of experiences with Black and Native American people in America. And I wish I knew someone that could get into that.
You do know me.
But I just don't.
No, you do.
I just can't think of a single person that might be useful
you do
to
know
put
me
here to relevantly explain that symbology for the video.
I can explain it.
But we got to move on.
What?
Let's talk about Sinners and capitalism for a bit. The vampire genre has a great advantage in the realm of critiquing social inequality, as vampire lore naturally lends itself to examining the nature of the haves and the have-nots. The metaphor is so effective that in Capital, Marx literally refers to vampires directly. Many see Sinners as continuing this tradition, but I see the alleged Marxist undertones as flawed and incomplete. It engages with some things well, specifically the utopian appeal of Remick, who in many ways represents capitalism. Specifically, Remick's proposition for joining them is something that you at least might consider. I've had legitimate debates with people about whether or not it would have been better for everybody just to become a vampire with Remick. And I like this because in other anti-capitalist narratives, the capitalists are so cartoonishly evil and bad that there's really no reason a person in the story or us watching would ever consider joining them in the first place. In a story like, say, The Hunger Games, it's easy to look at the people of the capital and their opulence and see them as wrong and believe that you would never be like them. But in reality, so many of us defend our capitalist overlords and want to join them. So as we're watching these types of anti-capitalist narratives, the dissonance ain't cognitive enough for some of y'all, so nothing seems to be learned. One thing that is forgotten in modern anti-capitalist discussions is that there was a time where capitalism was considered incredibly radical and progressive. Compared to feudalism and aristocracy, capitalism was revolutionary for its time. As I talked about in my Black Villains video, a good villain is the hero of their own story, and Remick in many ways feels understandable. He's not driven by racism, as the aesthetics of the film might lead you to believe. He himself is a victim of colonization, and this seems to have freed him from that experience. This framework of vampirism to him is the best thing for the people to go against their oppressors. You just have to die a horrible death first, and you'll never see the sun again, but you'll be free. So I do love that. I think that's very good and unique for any genre of social critique around inequality, to actually force you to consider if you're really with those who are oppressed or not. But this is also kind of where the film struggles with a level of conviction on this alleged anti-capitalist message. For one, aside from the horrible deaths, we don't actually see the negative ramifications of Remick's ideology. He doesn't balance it enough with showing the reason outside of the aforementioned brutal murder and sun avoidance to not side with them. We even still see Stack alive in the 90s, seemingly doing fine. A while back, I talked to one of my elders, Dr. Sunday Keita Chajua, about the film. He points out that another Black vampire film did a much better job of engaging with this anti-capitalist message without coming off so preachy.
Vampires should represent capitalism. I think Blade got that more right. The first Blade is clearly dealing with an anti-capitalist message, and it roots capitalism in whiteness, in the sense that that's Detroit, right? And one of you take those two scenes where they're meeting at the headquarters of the House of Erebus, and it's marble, lavish, and like being in a bank kind of thing. And then when they then jump cut to Blade driving from the hospital, and he's driving through the city of Detroit, and you can tell that it's been sucked out in the same way, that vampires would do a human. The time deindustrialization, deproletarianization has hit that city, and even the space that Blade and Whistler have as their headquarters isn't a defunct factory.
So in some ways, Sinners does a great job of engaging in an anti-capitalist message, but in others, it comes off a bit toothless. There's also this undercurrent of championing black business. Smoke and Stack at the end of the day are fighting to keep the piece of the pie they just bought, and there's different ways to interpret this, but it's ambiguous enough that the black wealth is black health type people will find something that they can champion within the movie, and I wish that wasn't the case. But I don't know if Coogler wanted that or if he wanted to do maybe the opposite. Sometimes when I watch Ryan Coogler's films, it's hard to tell exactly where his politics lie. He seems to indicate a lot of progressive, maybe radical politics, but a lot of that is left up to interpretation, and that interpretation can sometimes go in a different direction. And I find myself wondering where he really stands on a lot of things. And that's kind of it. That might be all I have to say about this movie that is of any real use. And this is why I didn't really want to make this video. Don't get me wrong. I wish I'd have made this video 6 months ago. The Kendrick Lamar Drake video money is drying up, and can use a big win in the algorithm. But and maybe what? Okay. Here we go. 10 things you didn't know about Sinners.
Welcome to Watch Negro. Today we're talking about the top 10 things you didn't catch about Sinners.
Somebody take me.
Number 10. Ryan Coogler is clearly a munch. Not only are all the men horny for pleasuring their ladies in this movie, but look at that man's mustache. That's an eater if I've ever seen one.
I want to again be clear. It's not that I didn't like the movie. I love this movie. But something about this movie, and more importantly, about the response to the movie, is off. And the nature of this, the fact that I could use this piece of art to make my own uninspired piece of art for the sake of making money and paying for the things I need to pay for. But this specific time, it wasn't right for me. It was too easy of a layup. And while I started this channel like on a whim, right? Because I wasn't satisfied with the way people talked about black media on YouTube. Over time, I started to adopt a more grand purpose for the channel. I also grew as a creator and a person and a thinker, and my politics changed. I've come to recognize that what I was really frustrated with when I first started the channel was not the absence of the type of media I wanted specifically, but the nature of black media in general. And I recognized pretty quickly that even as I was becoming successful, I was also suddenly included in that problem. And I've struggled at times with understanding and managing that feeling that I was in this machine that I was critiquing, and I needed my channel to continue to grow, but I also needed to feed my soul and make things that I found interesting and inspiring. And a Sinners video essay was not it. Ironically, this really great original black film, one of the most successful original films, black or otherwise, to come in decades, that happened to be about vampires, left me feeling kind of sucked dry. And then I hit 1 million subscribers. And it started to dawn on me that while I was going through this struggle, I was also becoming the biggest black figure in my genre on YouTube. And while it hasn't made me the wealthy, famous YouTuber I often joke about being, it has altered the reality of the space I occupy. I'm big enough now that legendary rappers and scholars mention me and my content on some of the largest platforms around.
Yeah, I really don't watch documentaries as much as I watch video essays. That's how I be learning everything.
FD Signifier, you ever people?
That's my dog.
Yo, I told you that's the one.
I even have a few rappers and radio personalities sneak dissing me on their podcasts for reasons I'll address some other time. My name has gotten big enough to be farmed for content by bad faith actors and Twitter trolls. I've stopped being the scrappy underground figure, and now I am within the establishment. I am one of the big dogs. And while there's drawbacks, it has also been extremely beneficial, not just monetarily, but in what I'm able to make now. And that excites me. I'm excited that I can make bigger, cooler things on this giant multinational corporation platform, who are also one of the biggest government contractors in existence. And that's when it hit me that my love for Ryan Coogler isn't just about his art. It's about his unique plight and position in this machine and how I can kind of relate to that, or relate to what I assume that plight might be. And I recognize now that Sinners was special, but also kind of dangerous. Dangerous, at least if we don't unpack and understand what it did. Because it represents a higher level of filmmaking and thematic messaging than I think has been encountered up until this point in mainstream media. So much so that it challenged me to evaluate my own role in the production of media and ideas. What I want to argue is that with Sinners, Coogler in a way is signaling the end of Black art, the top of the mountain, the pinnacle of Black excellence, as he's kind of done with all of his films, because the movie was able to do something that shouldn't have been possible. Be both this beautiful, radical piece of Black art that also was wildly successful for a machine that historically would only seek to destroy a beautiful, radical piece of Black art. How was that possible? What is it about Coogler that made this happen? And to figure this out, we have to go back and talk about the truth behind this movie and its director. Part 2, how is this even possible? Sinners is a period piece horror musical, a premise that again was only greenlit because its director Ryan Coogler was able to call his shot finally. It's not what Hollywood is really looking for at all these days, if ever. It's got no nostalgia bait, no superheroes. It stars a cast featuring mostly character actors and unknowns. Its lead actor is not known for his range, yet he's tasked with playing 2 different characters, often talking to each other. This man literally died in his own arms and it worked perfectly. Its director and writer, Ryan Coogler, has never made a film based on an original idea and has never had to prove that he's good enough to make something people will watch. The film features indulgent, wholly unnecessary scenes that in most other films would have been cut for time and resources, that somehow those same scenes manage to be high points in the film. And it does all of this with the expectation that Black audiences would leave their homes in a post-COVID world and pay 2025 movie ticket prices in a recession under Donald Trump to go see it. And we did, to the tune of around $400 million, making it the highest grossing horror movie ever and the second highest grossing original film in over a decade. But this isn't even the part that is all that interesting in my book, because if you know anything about Ryan Coogler, you know that boy's special and is quickly becoming the greatest Black director that Hollywood has ever seen. And I have complex thoughts on what that means, both for us as the audience, for the Hollywood system, and for him as an artist. And to be honest, those thoughts are more complex than any thoughts I have about Sinners as a film by itself. Let me be clear first. I love this movie to death. It is a new Black classic film. Coogler is now my favorite director, and if he keeps this up, he will probably be my all-time favorite director. But I'm the type of sicko who, when I love something, my love language is to analyze it to death, break it down, pick it apart, and investigate all the elements within it. My love language is hyperfixation. As I just said, Coogler is on the trajectory to be the greatest Black director of all time in a very short period of time. Only 5 major films to his name, all of them being excellent. And now with Sinners, he's probably the first true megastar auteur Black director, no longer really comparable to his predecessors like Spike Lee or Robert Townsend or the late John Singleton, or his contemporaries in Steve McQueen, Ava DuVernay, or Antoine Fuqua. Not even Jordan Peele is in the space that Coogler's entering. Coogler going forward should really be best compared to James Cameron and Peter Jackson, Christopher Nolan, etc. as an auteur director who isn't just a good storyteller, but a grand one who deserves large studio budgets and backing to make his creations come to life. It does say something that you won't find any other Black people or women in that same category. Despite all of the woke accusations of Hollywood, it's still very much a white man's industry. A study on Hollywood diversity in 2024 showed in their most recent data that only 22% of Hollywood films are directed by non-white people, and only 10% of that is Black, with only 2% being Black women. So calling Coogler the best Black director in the game right now may be accurate, but it's also kind of like calling him the world's fastest turtle. The competition isn't very stiff. But don't let that confuse you on just how special Coogler is. Much like Michaud, Coogler's entrance into the filmmaking industry was an unlikely one, maybe even destiny, considering the fact that it wasn't even something he was planning to pursue. Coogler was born in Oakland to 2 community-inclined and politically active parents. His mother was an activist and a community organizer, and his father worked in the juvenile justice system, giving Coogler a solid sense both of discipline but also Black struggle. Oakland, being the home of Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers, has a long lineage of Black radical politics, so by birthright, it makes sense that some of these politics will be represented in Coogler's work, even if they're flawed and incomplete, which are things I've gotten into talking about movies like Black Panther. But what's interesting is that Coogler didn't start out as a storyteller. In fact, the story goes that he wasn't thinking about it at all. Coogler actually went to a small college on a football scholarship and started out majoring in business. However, he was encouraged by his football program to take a creative writing class, and the story goes that his writing was so good that his teacher pulled him aside and tried to convince him to pursue a career in writing, which eventually translated to film. Coogler then changed his major and then ended up in the USC School of Arts after graduation. And there it seemed like he was the immediate standout talent. His short films got awards and everyone knew he was going to be big. He was a natural filmmaker who started out as a punt returner.
My senior year of football, I was doing so well, but I ended up breaking my zygomatic arch in 3 places. And it was almost as if something was telling me that I needed to work on that film school application.
There's a timeline where Coogler is like 3-4 inches taller and his football career keeps going, and Black Panther is directed by Kenya Barris or something, and he ends up playing for the Las Vegas Raiders or something. It needs to be understood, however, that despite his talent, Coogler, like every creator in Hollywood, black or otherwise, had to prove himself to the Hollywood machine. Coogler came out the gate hot with Fruitvale Station, retelling the tragic story of Oscar Grant, a young father in Oakland killed by a police officer who shot him in the back while he was handcuffed and face down on the ground. This film came out as the issue of police violence towards black people was like at its highest point. And as great as it was and as many awards as it was nominated for, I didn't watch it until several years after it came out. Yes, it was critically acclaimed, but at the end of the day, it was still another film about Black death being celebrated by a white industry whose tastemakers love to promote and put out movies about this subject, but not about other things that Black people like to actually see and have in their media. And so even if it's a well-made film, it always makes me less interested in any form of Black art that caters to this specific subset of white interests. But I also understand why these movies are made by directors like Coogler, because it did his job and it gave him enough cachet to make Creed. Creed is another movie that on paper sounds really dumb, and in my head, I thought that it was a project that some studio figure had in mind, especially in the era of franchises and remakes that was at its probably peak during that time period. But it turns out that Creed was Coogler's idea from jump, and he shopped it around the studios himself, and his success on Fruitvale Station is what gave him the power to get it done. And then Creed was also incredibly successful. Fruitvale Station and Creed are both excellent movies, but they also begin a pattern for Coogler, intentionally or not, where he's doing his best to elevate these tropey, stereotypical Black stories that the Hollywood system loves into something more. Fruitvale is at its core a story about meaningless Black death, but Coogler manages to elevate it into something more human and meaningful. Creed is at its core a rag to riches story about an angry Black man who grew up without a father. But Coogler turns it into this great motivational piece where more than a decade later, people are still making remixes of it on TikTok.
What's your name?
Creed! Also recognize that he's making both of these movies in his mid to late 20s. He's still a new kid on the block himself at this point. Coogler is special, not just in his talent, but in the ways his talent is uniquely capable of producing media that registers at multiple levels. For his Black audience and white audiences, his art is able to elicit emotions and cultural moments for Black people in the same way that Spike Lee or John Singleton did 30 years ago. But he can also attract larger white audiences the same way Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg can. The last original IP movie to make as much money as Sinners was Christopher Nolan's Inception. That's the level he's at. And again, that shouldn't be possible. There are a lot of talented directors, a lot of talented storytellers, a lot of innovative creatives in Hollywood, both Black and white, but it's hard to make supremely compelling blockbuster films. There's only a few directors in that category. I named a bunch of them earlier, and now Coogler showed with Creed that he was approaching that position. And then Black Panther 1 and 2 continued that streak. I've already made a whole video about Black Panther 1, so just go watch it for more thoughts. I've never made a video for Black Panther 2, but in retrospect, I think we undersell just how impressive Black Panther 2 was, considering the environment Coogler had to make it in.
I think that is maybe the most technically difficult blockbuster movie in the history of blockbusters, because not only did he have to make a movie that connected to all the next 19 Marvel movies. Right. Not only did he have to sell lunchboxes and Happy Meals and costumes, because Marvel's like, this is not just about the movie, it's about the industry, the economy around it. He also had to have an actual eulogy in the movie for Chad that Black people felt like Yes, that's a eulogy. That's not actually about the Black Panther.
Right,
You're doing a thing for Black people to say we lost this bright light. When has any white director had to do that? When has Joss Whedon had to do that?
Even if that movie has still a lot of flaws in its politics and wasn't quite as good as the first one, the circumstances of having to make a film and a eulogy at the same time while grieving, you got to give him credit for that. And with the success of now as a director grossing nearly $2 billion, he had enough clout and goodwill to cash some chips in. He had shown himself worthy to the machine, and now it would allow him the opportunity to make something of his own. And that something ended up being Sinners, and he knocked it out the park. If you go back and look at some of the other Black directors I mentioned, like Spike, Ava, Antoine Fuqua, John Singleton, etc., you notice that they seem to have two different trajectories in their career. For folks like Spike or Ava, they will make movies that show their worth to the system, much like Coogler did, but eventually they will go a bit too far to be accepted by the system. For Spike, it was maybe Do the Right Thing, a movie that white audiences felt was too much about race. The backlash to this behind the scenes was allegedly so bad that Spike Lee has basically had to fight for every movie he makes since then, including Malcolm X, which was supposed to be directed maybe by Steven Spielberg, which sounds fucking gross, but whatever. For Ava DuVernay, after she made Beast of the Southern Wild and Selma, I think making the 13th pushed her into an undesirable space where, similar to Spike, she's been fighting to get her projects funded ever since. And this is not to say that either filmmaker is so spectacularly radical. Both present a very moderate and very much captured liberal political ethos, or worse. Yet even in their liberal perspective, they're still too aggressive for the status quo to be fully supported by the machine. And then on the flip side, folks like Fuqua or F. Gary Gray or John Singleton, they mostly just were working directors who happened to be Black. They made even some provocative Black films like F. Gary Gray would Set It Off and Singleton with Boys in the Hood, but mostly they just work on projects as they come to them. Any other really radical filmmaker you probably wouldn't know of. The most radical that has made it into the mainstream a little bit is Boots Riley, but his movies don't really hit the theaters. And so Coogler should fall into one of these spaces, but somehow he kind of occupies all three, at least on paper. And as a critic of not just media, but Black people's unique experiences in it, this still leaves me perplexed. Was Coogler really getting away with making radical and racially provocative films that also get big studio backing and make big bucks? How is he doing it? How was he getting away with this? The answer is he wasn't. He's not doing all of those things. I talked to W. Kamau Bell because he's a Black man who has a successful career in this industry, and he's taken his fair share of meetings, working with some of Hollywood's biggest names, has done some great documentaries himself, and had his own long-running show on CNN. And he's aware of the unique balancing act that it takes for Black folks to be successful in this industry.
And again, I know Ryan, but I'm not speaking for him, but I think he understands that the way that Denzel understood that, like, here's the Black movie, here's the big Hollywood tentpole movie. Here's the Black movie. Sometimes they can cross over an Inside Man with Spike Lee, but often it's like one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. To have these moments where I'm watching the movie, but also knowing about what it is to be a creative in Hollywood, I don't know how to review it fairly because by the end, we're just all like clapping and cheering. You know what I mean? And it's more about the movie than about the Ryan and Zinzi's personal achievement.
Is this great piece of Black art. But this is not the perspective of Dr. Jared Ball, a professor of media studies at Morgan State University, who, if you watch me, you should be somewhat familiar with, as he's somewhat of a mentor of mine. Dr. Ball is the furthest thing from a Hollywood insider. And while I and W. Kamau Bell can indulge in the good vibes and strong storytelling and masterful filmmaking that Ryan Coogler presents us, Dr. Ball does possibly the more important work of engaging with the political ramifications of movies like Sinners and Black Panther and Fruitvale Station, etc. And it's through conversations with Dr. Ball that I finally realized there was a deeper conversation about Sinners that had to be brought to the forefront that I didn't think anyone was having.
Was not, to your point, it's not specific just to what the film does or doesn't do. It's the narrative around the whole film. That all of these things that are happening around that time, you're left with the only reference to any form of struggle at all is the entrepreneurial one. So that's part. And then the narrative around the film with Coogler getting ownership of it, and he's making this much money, and we should praise him, is part of what I'm saying.
For us.
It's a win for us. And that's why I think, coming back to the point you just made, it makes sense that your audience would be saying, where's your video on it? Because part of the narrative is influencers aren't talking about it enough because it is a black movie, or because they don't want to help because there isn't anything to hate on. Yeah. It's so good. So if I were doing my own philosophy correctly, I would be inviting the question, why are you as an audience liking this film? Why do you think you've liked the film? Sit with that. Investigate that. I'm not saying to condemn it or change it, but just to ask, what do I really like? Why am I liking this film?
And that's what got me to that question. Part 3, why do we really like Sinners so much? Dr. Ball and W. Kamau Bell are on opposite sides of their relationship to black media, and I find myself wavering between them at times. However, one analytical framework that Dr. Ball talks about a lot in his work is something that I think a lot of black folks, especially those of us who love and analyze media, need to adhere to, and that's the concept of what he calls the Vernon Doctrine of Black Media Avoidance.
Official title that I once gave it was the Vernon Philosophy of Black Media Avoidance. And it started with my homeboy Vernon, who was a real person. And he says to me, I'm never seeing another movie with black people in it. And I was shocked by that. He was like, and I was like, why would you say that? He said, I just refuse. And he said, because we never look good, was his initial. He said, we always come off looking crazy, starting with black people, but no oppressed group should ever look to see itself in this form of dominant media, because it's always going to be a misrepresentation. And I had even argued previously that all popularity in this context is a fraudulent misrepresentation of what it claims to be. And it's all politicized. There's no such thing as entertainment. This is the argument of those in power. If you look at their own arguments, the elite for 150 years in this country have specifically, they created a mass communications field of study specifically to learn how to manipulate the media environment to generate certain political outcomes. So like everything is, and it's all, and then if you look at the history of psychological warfare, counterinsurgency, military use of media and communication, it's all of the same processes. The same thing that they use to get us to buy a hamburger or a car, they use to give us our identities, our religions, our nationalities, our self-concept, that's why I always end up quoting Marshall McLuhan, who said that we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish. Because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception.
Simply put, the Vernon Doctrine of Black Media Avoidance argues that you should never seek to genuinely see yourself represented in any form of black media made under capitalism and white supremacy, because it will always present you some form of distortion of those things that you have to be aware of. And if you're not, you might end up taking away the wrong message or being manipulated in ways you don't realize. The premise of this video, that question, why do we like Sinners so much, is somewhat built on this concept. And I wanted to use it here because if there were ever a movie that truly challenges the Vernon Doctrine, it's probably Sinners. One of the core reasons why the Vernon Doctrine concept is powerful is because it recognizes that for a black person, or really any person, to get a large platform, there has to be compromises with the system to allow that to happen, present company included. Thus, every piece of mass-produced media is going to have those compromises built into it. But when you're as talented as Coogler and a few other black creators, you might miss those compromises. Or when you're not as talented as Coogler, when you're a hack, then those things will be so in your face that you still don't notice them because they're overly obvious. It's almost like they crossed the line twice. And suddenly I feel compelled to again show this bizarrely awful moment in the alleged classic black comedy, Two Can Play That Game.
Oh, dang, that loud. Lord. Why must Mexican and black people cause so much ruckus in the white man's apartment building?
Even before I ever read a lick of black political work, I wondered to myself when I saw this, why the fuck was this joke in this movie? Why was it put here in the first place? Let alone, why didn't someone say in the editing process, this seems awful, let's take it out?
Now, I hate that I had to say that.
And I don't think the reason is that some white man in a suit forced it in per se, but a series of actions and environmental factors made it so nobody that had sense saw this awful joke and said, this probably shouldn't be there. Let's go back to Oscar Micheaux. Early in his career, his films were much more radical for their time. His film Within Our Gates was a response to the recent success and popularity of Birth of a Nation, the legendary film that helped revive the KKK but also created the concept of the blockbuster film. Another of Micheaux's films, Veiled Aristocrats, addresses the tradition of passing in ways in which race interacts with class. It ends with a young passing black woman defying her family to find love with a black man of a lower social status and darker skin. Messages like racism is bad and classism is bad, even amongst black people, don't seem like radical positions now, of course, but at the time, it's what led to him coming under a ton of scrutiny. While Micheaux was a storyteller and artist, at the end of the day, his job wasn't to make art, it was to make money. During Micheaux's time, film wasn't quite an industry yet, but it was on its way. They didn't even call them movies or films, but moving pictures and photo plays. But even at the time, the forces of capitalism were already recognizing the power and use of the medium of film were tools for influencing the population and spreading certain messages. For example, you ever notice how prominent trains are in old movies and how much train footage there is from an older time? This is actually due to a concerted effort by the railroad industry to utilize film to promote the uses of trains for transportation in the 1900s, to show them as marvels of modern science and industry, and further, this pushed an image of American ingenuity. It was important culturally as it promoted the idea of American exceptionalism and spreading the Americana myth. Big Train, if you will, was instrumental in propping up the film industry in its infancy and funded many filmmakers in the development of film technology, not for the purpose of creating a new artistic medium, but for creating a market to sell and for producing manufactured consent to the American project as a whole. A paper on travel film documents this history and how it shows the film industry using its potential to develop a national identity.
In conjunction with the commercial travel interests of the railroads, the embryonic US film industry espoused a romantic vision of the American and Canadian Wests as primordial landscapes. At the same time, it promoted a progressive teleological vision of the railroads as the infrastructure supporting those modern nationalist ideologies. On-screen, train travel and its built environment, tracks, bridges, tunnels, depots, roundhouses, and related structures appeared as modern feats of engineering that provided access to a seemingly authentic pre-industrial landscape. The tension between these competing visions of the New West and the Old West lay at the heart of railroad films.
Today, instead of trains, we have toys and video games. Everything that Disney makes its real money off of. Everything that Coogler proved he could do back with Black Panther.
You would think after everything Issa Rae did for HBO that she would have a building at HBO where she just did whatever she wanted to do in.
Right.
But after the shutdown of DEI, she's now independent. You know what I mean? So like Ryan only, and this is not taking anything away from Ryan, but Ryan got there because he also knew how to sell lunchboxes. Like, you know, and I don't know that he thinks of it that way. I've never talked to him about that. But I think the idea being that, like, the one time I was talking to a very high-level executive at a very high-level company in the high-level place of Hollywood, and he said at one point, he's like, you want to win the Emmy Award, but you also want to win the Bank of America Award.
Micheaux didn't have those problems or responsibilities specifically, but he was still beholden to the pressures of the industry. And even he spoke to the fact that later in his career, he needed to capitulate in order to get his films made. He was faced with the choice, turn it down or turn it off. Micheaux states, as quoted from Cedric Robinson's Forgeries of Memory and Meaning, Blacks in Regimes of Race in American Theater and Film Before World War II.
I have always tried to make my photo plays represent the truth, to lay before the race a cross-section of its own life, to view the colored heart from close range. My result might have been narrow at times, due perhaps to certain limited situations which I endeavored to portray, but in those limited situations, the truth was the predominant characteristic.
In Sinners, we see Coogler making the similar maneuvers that Micheaux had to in order to make his films. Coogler re-employed some of the same trickery he did in Black Panther by alluding to and subtly referencing radical images and ideology without establishing its value within his work. There's just enough for us as Black people to know it's there and to know he's saying something to us that we value, but not enough to scare normie white audiences or threaten the administrators within his industry. Black Panther didn't make over $1 billion worldwide because it was an aggressively radical and provocative Black film. It made that money because it gave its black audience just enough depth and subtextual messaging to hit the right nerve while not being too scary to anyone else. Believe it or not, it's important to many portions of white audiences that they perceive that the black audiences that a piece of media is intended for is satisfied with the art that they're given, lest they see themselves as consuming subpar or worse, harmful black media. In short, when black people point to a piece of black art in unison and say, hey, this is good, white people are prone to agree. And if black people point to a piece of art and say, not so much, white people tend to have a more mixed response. A perfect example right now is what's happening with Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Drake had been the biggest rapper in the world for like a decade, and for the most part, black people were fine with that because we enjoyed us some Drake. And as he slowly started to become what he's become,
Anita Max win.
It was difficult to create a sense of separation. But ever since Drake lost the battle with Kendrick Lamar, Kendrick has very clearly and obviously taken his place, in Drake's fan base, his predominantly white fan base, has started to abandon him in droves. This is why for black artists, even from just a cynical level, regardless of how you truly feel about making meaningful black art, if you want to be big and successful, you know you have to satisfy black people first. That, or you fully sell out like Flow Rider or something. If you have any level of conviction toward black issues, but also a desire to be big, then you have to learn that balancing act that Coogler has perfected. And he does it better than probably anyone else has ever done. Going back to Kendrick Lamar, in some ways I would compare his Super Bowl performance to what Coogler has done for years now. There's enough sound and fury and black thought and aesthetics put into what was done to make it feel like black people witnessed something radical and provocative, but it's quite enough in that messaging to ensure that he won't be held accountable, that there will be plausible deniability, and to essentially not do anything at all while employing that energy and aesthetic. No one has or will revoke Kendrick Lamar's access to the machine for what he did at the Super Bowl, and no one is going to do that to Coogler for what came out of Sinners.
The black audience in particular, desperate for, even unconsciously, for revolution or revolutionary content, is projecting onto these folks something that isn't there. So that's why there's been so much defense of Kendrick as some sort of making some sort of radical statement, because he has Sam Jackson in there. People don't even know what he's really saying or doing. There's just an assumption.
It's just the aesthetics.
Meanwhile, he's signing, right? And meanwhile, he's signing contracts and going on tour. And the brother that actually did something radical at his event, raising the flag of Palestine and the Sudan, he just got locked up again. But this is, again, why I like the Vernon philosophy, because it's not just what an individual is saying or doing, it's what is projected or what is interpreted by the audience. Kind of like with Beyonce, there's these symbolic references to blackness, to womanhood, to to that unconscious, untapped desire among black people for revolution.
What this amounts to in Sinners is a very black, liberal, black, capitalist-friendly image of black radicalism. Smoke and Stack could be seen as lumpen proletariat, and they do lead a resistance of sorts against the capitalist bloodsuckers, literally in this case. But Smoke and Stack are aspiring bloodsuckers themselves, only uniting their community to serve their business ventures. A business that relied on capital stolen from white criminals in the North to pay white criminals in the South. Now you can also interpret and say, well, actually, this is Coogler showing the folly of black capitalism and buying power. Maybe Coogler is a fan of Dr. Ball's book about the myth of black buying power. They're showing the literal dead end of what black capitalism leads to. There is that scene where Smoke and Stack debate the wooden nickel, and that scene where they stump out the dude trying to steal money. I'm inclined to see the film through that analytical frame, but at the same time, we don't see any form of what real resistance might look like before the vampires. We don't spend any time with the workers before they're recruited to actually engage with any aspect of leftist analysis. We don't fully understand why a juke joint might be needed in Jim Crow South environment. There was space maybe to engage with Fanon here and his discussions of dance and revelry under colonization, but it's all left in the air. Further, we also have at least one scene that glorifies the business world and the violence needed to make it possible. That scene where Smoke shoots the little boy in the middle of the street that's mostly played for laughs. So there's a paradox between these two forces that is purposely vague, and I think that's fine if we as the viewer have the capacity to see all the aspects of what's being said or left unsaid, something that Coogler clearly wanted to do. I really had a moment watching interviews from Coogler when he did the press run with this film, because you could see the difference in how black people engaged with him and how white people did. And it's almost like so many more white people wanted him to explain himself, to put himself at risk for being more direct about the message of the film. Whereas the black folks are like, nigga, I see what you're doing. Like in this interview, this woman basically does damn near all the analysis I'm giving to you now. And Coogler is mostly like, yeah, you know where I'm from, no? You know where I'm from?
I feel like you've got, I want to say it's like the first actual Marxist vampire movie, because it feels what you're trying to do there. And so
where I'm from?
No, come.
I'm from Oakland.
Oakland, okay.
Zinj. She walked away. Fuck. Help.
He refuses to take the bait, but it doesn't come off like slick too much. In fact, I'd argue Coogler seems like he wants to confirm these things. He wants to nerd out in this conversation around his film and his politics, but he knows he can't and he shouldn't. He knows he would lose his position if he did.
I'm loving talking to you. Like, I don't know how
I need some quotes, dude.
And you actually see this with a lot of black men in these positions, a lot of them California. Like, it reminds me of Marshawn Lynch, who's also from Oakland, in the way he responded to interviews throughout most of his career.
I'm here so I won't get fined. I'm here so I won't get fined. I'm here so I won't get fined.
And when I look at these interviews and analyze the film this way, I want to be clear, I'm not being anti-Coogler. I respect and empathize with what Coogler's doing here. What I am is anti the culture industry. I'm anti to how these systems make this dance a requirement for him to be who he is. This system says to folks like Coogler that it would give us this beautiful, fun, and engaging piece of black film. But if we want it to be this grand cultural moment that it was and not some underground darling, then he has to walk that line. And I deeply empathize with that plight for Ryan Coogler and for all the various things that he hints at in the film, the things that he wants people to perceive and discuss, but not confirm in his work. That said, that issue, the plight of the black artist, is probably the one thing that I think Coogler did not leave vague within the film, but it's something I haven't seen a lot of people focus on. Part 4, Sinners, is about black art. If you ask most people, the people that helped Sinners gross nearly $400 million at this point, why they like Sinners, the top answer would undoubtedly be what's often referred to as the juke joint scene. And it's no surprise as to why. It's one of the coolest things you're gonna see in a movie anytime soon. At this point in the film, it's been a pretty good character drama, not much in the way of vampires yet, no blood, nothing groundbreaking, just gradually revealing various characters in the story, establishing interest and motivation, setting up future conflicts, and then putting them all into place at the juke joint. We got the Smokestack twins and their goals of opening a business. We have the aforementioned Annie and her connection to smoke. We have Stack's estranged lover, and we have Mary and her racial conflict. We got Delta Slim, our grizzled elder, and so many others, with the star being Sammy, who I haven't talked about yet, because he's the key to everything. There's so much to say about Sammy, and most of it is said in this scene. On paper, this scene, like most of Sinners, should suck. It shouldn't work. It's so on the nose, so out of left field for what the movie had been up until this point. So sincere and overt in its messaging that initially when I realized what Coogler was doing, I wondered if people would mock it or call it cringe. But Coogler's just that good, especially when he's intentional. So first, there's the technical aspects, right? I'm not a film guy enough to tell you whether or not this was done in one shot, but the effect of it definitely made you think that this was all one camera movement. One thing that I haven't talked about is that Coogler's clearly a film nerd, and he was really in his film nerd bag for this moment. But what I can engage with is how this scene presents the core theme of death of black art. It starts with Delta Slim explaining to Sammy the true nature of the blues, explaining something that I think many black people are aware of in our experience.
Blues wasn't forced on us like that religion. No, sir. We brought this with us from home. It's magic what we do.
Which is that a lot of us have this divine connection to expression and art. Not to get too much into my Afrocentrism bag, but it can't be ignored how black art, or maybe art made by people of the African diaspora, just tends to be better. Maybe not always the most complex or acclaimed or technically proficient, and definitely not the most lucrative for us a lot of times, but it's by far the types of art, especially dance and music, that people all over the world engage with and desire the most. Whether hip hop or rock and roll before that or jazz before that, Black music and dance is loved worldwide, while the people who make it or originated it are hated. That's a paradox that can't be explained through simple sociology. It's because there's something to our song that can't be explained. I know I alluded to the movie being anti-Christianity earlier, but that doesn't mean that the movie is anti-religion, because it presents this moment in the juke joint as a religious experience for everyone there, the same as it might have happened in a church. I'm not a religious person, but I know what a religious experience feels like, both from my limited times in a religious temple, but also the first time I heard Killing Me Softly by the Fugees, or CeeLo Green's verse on I Refuse Limitations. I remember in 1998 how I literally momentarily transcended into a different plane of consciousness with no drugs involved in James Carter's musty basement for his 16th birthday party when Brandon Simmons, the DJ of the party, played the Thong Song by Cisco 3 times in a row. I lost my mind. I still don't know what happened in that 15-minute period. I hope everyone was okay. This may seem silly to you. You may not agree with this premise. You might be the type to get frustrated by Black people having too much fun that you don't feel included in. If that's the case, you probably also aren't this far into this video and didn't like that scene, which means you're greatly alone in that stance, to be honest. But in this scene, Coogler illustrates this divine connection of Blackness and art in multiple ways. First, in Slim's specific words, blues wasn't forced on us like that religion. We brought this with us from home. Now, mind you, just so Lil Bill don't curse me out, Christianity in its original and appropriate form was African before it was European. Do the knowledge, if you will. But Slim is specifically speaking of the form of Eurocentric Christianity, an abomination born of greed, capitalism, and imperialism after the fall of Rome, which was a tool of colonization. So this scene is Coogler declaring that art is divinely inspired, that whatever it is that created us or gives us a soul, we can connect through it through music. And I would argue the art itself, that we can connect through it through music, or I would argue art in general. Coogler shows us that this divineness in Black art connects us to this moment in the Reconstruction South, and also to African traditions before and after that point in time, on into the future with rock and roll and hip hop and whatever comes next. Coogler uses these various images to deify the concept of art and the necessity of the artist and culture, and not even just within Black or African people, but everyone. Hence this moment where even Grace Child characters Lee Jun dances with their husband and then has their connections to this special spiritual essence emerge. So in this scene, you're seeing all these relevant elements of Black art and music from Africa to now, even including these other nationalities, and it literally tears the roof off. The roof is literally on fire, and the scene ends as they literally let the motherfucker burn, echoing the classic refrain that you might hear at a Black juke joint across time. It is an amazing scene that resonates deeply if you're lucky enough to know what it must have felt like in that room, in that crowd, enraptured by that moment. In my opinion, in those instances, you are connected to something higher. You're connected to the divine, and it's all because of Sammy, the artist, that we're able to do that. Sammy is our priest, our shaman. He opens up the portal to the beyond with his art, and it's because of him for a moment that we commune with God. And just across from this divine moment, and the coldest shot in the whole movie, are the vampires, the capitalists. It's literally the Disney Corporation, in my opinion. This shot, the look in Remick's eyes, tells us everything Coogler feels about his unique plight and position as the divinely touched artist. Because the vampires are capitalists thirsting for divinely inspired art and aren't just even satisfied with consuming, but have to subsume the art and control it for their own purposes. If the vampires are Disney, then Sammy is Ryan Coogler, someone with a gift that is paradoxically cursed. There's a paradox in play here that is purposely vague, and I think that's fine if we as the viewer have the capacity to see all the aspects of what's being said or left unsaid, something that Coogler clearly intended. A lot of people have pointed out the vampires as representing white people seeking to consume Black art, and I think that's true, but I feel like people see this in too broad of a cultural sense. They see vampires in cultural appropriation and how there's MAGA rappers now that aren't even from America. They see it in the classic phrase, "They want our rhythm, not our blues," where black artists can be prominent and popular worldwide in terms of the art they produce, but still mistreated and subjected to racial abuse no matter where they go in the world. I actually think the vampires are more specific. The vampires here in their hive mind are explicitly above race in their outlook. That is something that the movie wants to be very clear about. The fact that Sammy is black and Remick is white is incidental to the fact that Sammy is gifted and Remick wants that gift. They offer Sammy the opportunity of immortality in exchange for access to that gift. In that last scene where Sammy is played by the legendary Buddy Guy, Stack even makes the offer again, says he can let him play on forever. And this is why the vampires actually represent Disney, because they have the power to give Sammy the opportunity to commune with the divine forever without fear or worry. And in return, it's not as simple as cultural appropriation. It's literally the control of the gift at its source. And this means that the stories can only be so true to Sammy's vision, to his gift in the first place. So what is Sammy, or moreover Ryan Coogler, a storyteller, to do when he has these stories in his heart, in his head, and I would say a desire to serve black people through them? And the only way to satisfy both desires to their fullest extent is to allow the monsters in, to compromise with the very system that he seeks to destroy and that seeks his destruction. For me, when I asked myself why I like Sinners so much, it was recognizing this conflict and empathizing with it, connecting with Sammy, with Coogler, and seeing the whole thing as beautifully tragic. You might be tempted to say that balancing act, that need to let the monsters in, is a universal thing for all Hollywood directors. And you're right. Someone like Christopher Nolan has had a very similar trajectory as Ryan Coogler, going from smaller independent works to comic book films and graduating into his own prestige original ideas. And this is true. But the standards, the expectations, and the process aren't quite the same. The Hollywood system, the industry, the monsters, and to be fair, society as a whole has a different rubric for black artists and a different set of requirements, expectations, and consequences. It's not enough for Coogler to just sell lunchboxes. It's not enough for him to be bankable. It's not enough for him to connect and move the spirits of black people. He has to do all those things at once while also still trying to commune with the divine.
Being a black artist is difficult because you have to be political 100% of the time if you want to do it with praxis. You know, the expectations are so much higher because you are called to encompass all of the black identity that you occupy, and that's impossible, but the expectation is still there. Black people who make art in the West, and that would include the United States and Britain, we inherit so many things that we did not create for ourselves that encompass black art and black archetype, and what it means to be black on screen, what it means to be black on the page. We inherit all of that even if we didn't contribute it to it actively. And so we're not just dealing with the lens of us wanting to create art, but also having to challenge the way that we are perceived by people who consume art about us.
That's why Coogler is so careful in these interviews. You might want to judge him or look at him negatively about that, but Coogler also remembers what happened to Nina Simone. He saw what happened to Paul Robeson. He knows the history of what happens when you go full force in these things. You lose your ability to do the thing at all. Nina Simone died poor. As stated earlier, black artists are expected to be activists and artists at the same time, to make content that must be sold to white consumers. This is why when I see people try to accuse any black figure of having a white audience, it doesn't make any fucking sense to me that as an issue, unless you're directly addressing something that's being said, it holds no merit. All highly successful black artists through American history have had to have large white audiences. It's impossible to be highly successful and black and making art without attracting a white audience. And quiet as it's kept, there are enough white consumers out there who aren't all that bothered by black art that engages directly with black issues. Nina Simone, as she was getting blackballed, was still getting a white audience, just not access to the largest version of it. When she sang Mississippi Goddamn, it was at Carnegie Hall, not a sweaty juke joint. But the white ran industry, the one looking to set the tone and establish a hegemonic worldview, that's a different story. That's the dance with the devil. That's living in sin. That's Coogler, in a way, asking his audience to forgive him of his sins for making this movie in the first place, knowing what it ultimately serves. For a while, I didn't quite get the extra scene at the end of Sinners, where Stack shows up with Mary and they have a friendly talk with a now much older Sammy, who seems to have been playing the blues for the previous half century. But once you realize Sammy is Coogler, talking to his own characters, you get it. Stack asks Sammy if he still has the real in him, not the Disney product that Smoke shot to death a few minutes earlier, but the real thing that Black people are seeking through his art: liberation, freedom. And Sammy shows that he does. He sings Traveling, a song about moving through the world aimlessly for the sake of love. And then right after he finishes, Stack slams money on the table in a very deliberate shot. And the last thing Sammy says is how until the sun went down, that experience, that communing with the divine, was the best night of his life. And when I look at the film through this lens as a metaphor on Black art and Black artists, it's bittersweet, maybe even tragic. The art industry almost killed Sammy, left him with trauma and permanent scars. But that experience of creating feels like freedom. I definitely get that as well. Even if it just feels like freedom, it's still very enticing. And that's why people love Sinners and why Coogler is such a master of his craft. Coogler said he wanted to make something that was so good and so effective as a piece of media within this machine that it felt like freedom for that 2-hour period. That people would write think pieces and make countless YouTube video essays and make Discord groups and group chats talking about it. That even some of the harshest critics I know, when they did their analysis, couldn't come down too hard on it and had to recognize that most of them enjoyed it. And damn it, I love him for that, and I love the movie for that. But I pity and empathize with what that all means and what it took to do it. And I want everyone who had that experience, who tweeted and talked about this on social media, who cursed out Variety for that dumbass article they wrote, to still have that experience, but to also be able to deconstruct what that experience was in the aftermath. Go to the movie and get that catharsis that high. And then when you come down, have the tools to have clarity about what you experienced and why. Because while Coogler's work will make us feel freedom, it will never get us free.
We all have an encouraged, if not innate, desire to be seen, to be heard, to be part of the zeitgeist and the pop cultural moment. The media environment we are caught up in has been meticulously designed to give us versions of that, to feed us versions of that, with always the goal of suppressing any latent potential conscious or unconscious, subconscious, radical, revolutionary desires and interests. So this is on the one hand why when it comes to judging the individual behavior or choices, I'm far less critical, in the sense that whatever I might think of Sinners or Coogler's catalog or Jordan Peele or anyone, or even something I liked a little more, the Sorry to Bother You film from Boots, all of them are having to do this in an environment where they have to find ways of we got to have a whole horror comedy genre. What I'm encouraging, at least, is that we become a little bit more critical about what it is that we're liking in something. Always reminded that there is a politics to this content. It is not just entertainment. It is from the perspective of the owners of media, of the owners and the investors in the research and the data that has gone into the field of mass communications for the last 100+ years, 150 years. It is warfare. It is military. It is given euphemism by the language of branding and advertising and marketing. When George Creel says in 1917 that the way he convinced white farmers to go die in the trenches of Europe was by conquering their convictions. That is such a heavy line to me. That's how they're approaching it. So the more we only see it as entertainment, the more susceptible we are to all of that taking place.
And some of you might ask then, well, FD, what will? What media will get us free? And obviously, none. Duh. Like, y'all, the revolution will not be televised. I know y'all heard that song. It's not just a song, it's a way of life, right? Get organized. Go to some meetings, donate some money. That's the best advice I can give you on this YouTube video owned by Google, paid for by AdSense. Ain't no telling what y'all been watching in these ad breaks between this video. I've heard of the wildest shit coming on my channel. That's why I be getting annoyed when people be like, you ain't offering no solutions. Nigga, yes I am. Follow more Black political orgs on Instagram and less fitness models, and you're already on your way. If you are watching something on YouTube or any mainstream media channel, you are not going to get the revolution there. Even if it's made by Ryan Coogler, even if it feels like it. And that's okay. Watch it anyway if you like it, because you can multitask. But still, the real takeaway here is that the Vernon Doctrine is real. And if you're wanting to see something truly radical, you're not going to be served it through mainstream venues. There are directors like Boots Riley who was able to make even more provocative and overtly radical films. Sorry to Bother You is a new classic. I'm a Virgo is surreal Black perfection. But that's also a thing to recognize. Boots has to build his radical messages through these surrealist framings. He had to literally turn a nigga into a horse on screen in order to get across this communist message. So if you do want more radical messages, you're wanting to look outside of the mainstream and outside of the machine for those elements of Black art and film.
There is a lack of understanding, I think, that like the Black artist is pulling from so many other things, but they can only tell one story. That's their own. And that if you want to see other things, you have to invest in other kinds of art. Like I think sometimes it's very exhausting to talk to people who only watch movies on Netflix. And then they're like, where is the Black cinema for us? Are you watching other things?
Right.
Are you investing in other independent Black artists that are doing stuff? And a lot of you guys are not. And that's okay. Not everyone is a film bro in that way. But then to have a conversation about, like, especially when it comes to like how it will lead into diaspora issues, it's like you have to be active in seeking out anything that is appealing to you on that level. Because if you're because Tyler Perry's not the only director out there. But if that's the only time you go to movies is to watch the thing that you know the name of, then you're gonna have a very limited palette when it comes to Black art.
Well, when you say about hip hop, the thing that I think is like Black art is only not dead if we understand that Black art at its best was probably always independent anyway. Now, I'm not saying that means Ryan Coogler can't do the Warner thing, but he worked as hard as he could to make it his thing.
I never want people to think I'm complaining about these types of media, that I'm complaining that Kendrick Lamar isn't radical enough, because you can go listen to some old Dead Prez or Skip Coon or Infinity Nas and Brian Ennals. Are my videos too moderate for you? Fuck me then, don't watch my shit. Have you watched Anansi's Library? I've shouted Anansi's Library out like 4 or 5 times in different videos. Andrewism, even Lil Bill. Have you ever seen Sankofa, the spook who sat by the door? There's tons of stuff out there outside of the machine that the Vernon Doctrine doesn't apply to. And I'm not saying you can't like sinners. I am not saying that you can't like sinners. I'm just saying you can do both. And if you don't want to, you should shut the fuck up. Stop trying to make sinners into Sankofa. Instead, make Sankofa into sinners. And this last part goes to the artist. Some of you might want what Coogler has. I know I do. And some might be fine outside of the machine. And more than ever, if you are outside of the machine, if you want to control what your art looks like, you can do that. You can make your independent films and put them here on YouTube. The algorithm may or may not be kind to it, but it usually won't stop it. You can literally just start creating without even knowing what you're doing. If you have that divine connection and you don't want to wait on the monsters to come for you, play your song on your own if you have it in you, regardless of the challenges, because let's be real, are you going to let that stop you if you have that song? When I speak of the end of Black art, I only mean it as a commercial enterprise. In a way, Sinners serves as the endpoint of how good your art can be within the machine. And in some ways, that's a beautiful and glorious death. But that doesn't mean Black art, as the divine practice it is, has to stop, nor the efforts that we should be having to destroy the system that holds our art back. The art that's been up on this easel is not some type of special art that I got from special galleries. This has been mostly the art of my father-in-law, and this one actually came from an old high school student. And I don't know if it's good. I don't know if this is great art, but the spirit that girl had for art, I wanted to support. So I had her make this for probably like $150 and never got rid of it. It is probably going on 15 years old now. Same for the artist that made my thumbnail for the Beyonce video. He also made the original art for the Diddy video. Shout out to Dogon Krieger, great artist you should be checking out. The song that played at the beginning of the video is from my half brother, Matt Clear, who is an amazing independent alternative R&B artist that you should also check out because, I mean, clearly that shit is a jam. I don't want this to stop. I want everyone that wants to make art to keep making it, but I also want them to be able to make it outside of the system that controls it. And that's just not the case unless you can do it independently, unless you can get backers, or unless you don't want to live off your art. Sadly, the machinations of the Hollywood machine will never be in our control like that. And we will always be beholden to it when it comes to enterprise, when it comes to business. There just isn't room for Black people. We don't have the capacity to bend this system to our will without submitting to it first. And I can't wait to see what Ryan Coogler does next, considering that he's already went through that process. And despite the fact that his art is still within and beholden to that system, he's making amazing stuff. It will be subject to the Vernon Doctrine because it will come through the system, but that doesn't mean it won't be entertaining or that it won't be something important for us to talk about. But that is the state of the game right now until someone, some force within media, a benevolent and righteous figure maybe, could rise from out of nowhere, and that person outside of the Hollywood system could be willing to give Coogler the same budget and access to the same tools that Hollywood would without the nonsense. What if we had a Black-owned media institution apart from the Hollywood system, built with Black dollars the way that we always imagined that Black buying power myth to work? What if we had that autonomy without the system's oversight or even permission to make the art we want to make? What if we had someone who takes that Black business, Black excellence, Black mythology, rhetoric, and truly makes it happen? Build something magnificent for us and by us in a way where the only people who can tell that person what to do is their own audience. And if we had that person, so many Black filmmakers, including visionaries like Coogler, could bring us art better than we ever dreamed of. It could still be successful the same way that art always is, and it would have the backing of a system that was controlled by us. That sounds like a fantasy. And it is, but not because it's not real. It's a fantasy because the person that does have all those things does not want to do those things. Because that person is Tyler Perry. And we're going to have to talk about that some other time. In the meantime, you can find out how to support my content by signing up for my streaming service, Nebula. I've actually been working on some things in the background, and one of them will hopefully be my own full-fledged documentary on the concept of whiteness. It's not ready for the big time yet, but a proof of concept was made for it late last year. Talking to White People is a short documentary film, but it packs a punch as I talk to some of the most significant white creators across the YouTube landscape with a variety of ideological and political positions, but who all have in common the fact that they're technically white. But what does that even mean? It's hopefully the beginnings of my first big project on my streaming service, Nebula. For those who don't know, Nebula is the independent streaming service created by YouTubers like me to be a home away from YouTube. Videos like the one you just watched are not typically super successful on YouTube, but in case you haven't been following me for a while, I've been very successful at numerous videos like this because I have the support of Nebula. They have been instrumental in supporting me as I built this channel over the years, and it's not just me, it's tons of other very talented creators. And that's because Nebula has graduated from being just the independent streaming service created by YouTubers to be a home away from YouTube to being an independent film studio all on its own. If you know anything about Nebula, then you know that we've had some of the most talented and forward-thinking creators around, and because we have so much talent on our roster, we have been expanding to say, what if we give this talent the resources to go bigger and better than what they thought possible? And through that, we now have full-fledged documentary series like Tom Nicholas's documentary Boomers, or the upcoming anthology series Subliminal, which is featuring episodes written and directed by numerous Nebula creators. And along with this, you still have exclusive content by me, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, Jacob Geller, Legal Eagle, and so many more. And it's not just videos. We also have a huge list of podcasts, including the experimental narrative journey Faithless. Please sign up using my link in the description. You'll be supporting the growth of not just my channel, but of creators like me to continue to grow as creators and bring you the type of things you can't see anywhere else. Also, right now, Nebula is allowing for lifetime membership subscriptions for $500, but if you use my link in the description, you can get it for only $300. That's $200 off for infinite access to everything Nebula offers. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to Nebula for sponsoring the video, and peace.